I'm pleased to lead our work at the Center on Inclusive Climate Finance for African Countries. And this event is part of our working group series. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion today on the potential for green hydrogen in African markets. Global demand for hydrogen is projected to rise sevenfold by 2050. And a new report by EIB says that African countries could make up $1 trillion in green hydrogen a year by 2035. This increase would be a boost of GDP by 6 to 12% in 6 key countries, and by mainly harnessing solar resources. But to get there, an investment of 500 billion or more is needed between now and 2050. And so we're going to have this important discussion today about how African countries can mobilize this investment to meet this potential. And to do so, I'm joined by a senior panel of experts that I will be moderating a discussion between. And with that, I would like to welcome to this discussion Jean-Paul Adam, the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Natural Resource Management Division at the UN, Sheldon Husselman, Senior Project Developer and Environmental Planning Management at Africa, and Professor Stefan Liebing, the CEO of Conjuncta and the former chairman of the Africa Viren, and Chigozie Nweke-Eze, the CEO of Integrated African Power. So please come to the stage and join us in this conversation. And I would love to go around, and maybe we can start with Jean-Paul to discuss what role you're playing, particularly at the UN, in the development of green hydrogen for African markets.
Thank you very much, Aubrey, and it's great to be here with good friends and experts in this field. My experience is mainly through the support that we are providing as the Economic Commission for Africa to African countries. And this is through the Sustainable Development Goals 7 initiative, SDG 7 initiative, which is aiming to support countries to find the right energy mix and to mobilize private sector investment, particularly because African countries in their energy sectors are very dependent on official forms of finance to be able to invest in their energy sector. And less than 14% of their current climate finance needs come from the private sector. So there's a huge gap, particularly from the private sector side. And through the SDG 7 initiative, we're trying to look at the research elements that can allow green hydrogen to be a valuable investment proposition. It's obviously very early in the game, but it's very important that we can support those countries that they can attract investment to deal with their own needs and as a potential export. And perhaps the other point that I would just therefore emphasize is when we look at the energy transition plans, we're tending to emphasize that they should be energy transformation plans, because it's really about the transformation of the whole economy. And the guidance and advice we're trying to provide is so that they can situate green hydrogen within this transformative aspect of their economies, how they use this as a potential export and as a driver for their energy needs. And perhaps I'll stop there for now.
And diving into one specific country, I mean, Sheldon, you're very familiar with the Namibia work in the space. And I know the Namibians, at least for the past 2 years, have been speaking about green hydrogen globally and have been seen as kind of one of the potential hubs in the region. So I'd love to hear what role you're playing in helping develop that.
Thank you, Aubrey. And yes, it's a privilege to be here with other experts in the field. And yeah, my name is Sheldon, as mentioned, and I'm a senior, one of the senior project developers at Hyphen, and I'm responsible for the environment work stream. And my particular work stream is looking at focuses on one of the major aspects of the feasibility study, which we are shortly to start, which will be looking at about 24 months, and a really big part of that is the EIA. The location of our project is in a national park, and faces some unique challenges because of that. And also, our project seeks will will be financed by international financing institutions. And so obviously there's all those requirements from these lending institutions that Hyphen would need to comply with. So that's where I
Yeah,
come.
and looking at the picture that's behind you, you're developing, say a little bit more about the project. Looks like you're developing through solar, and
yes.
It is in Namibia. And so tell us a little bit more on how it came to be.
So Namibia, Hyphen it would be Namibia's first gigawatt scale green hydrogen project, and it's a combination of uses a combination of solar and wind, about between 5 to 7 gigawatts of generation, to run a 3 gigawatt electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen. And it's located in the Karas region of Namibia, which is in the south, where the best wind resource in Namibia is found, and it's among the top wind resources in the world. And obviously Namibia has a lot of sunshine, so that's also so the combination of these two, along with some other mix of energy, really it provides the mix of energy required to run the electrolyzer, which eventually the hydrogen will be pumped out to the port facility, and from there, using the Haber-Bosch process, take nitrogen out of the air and create green ammonia for export. So that's the
fantastic. So Stefan, I want to come to you in conjuncta. Tell us a little bit of how you fit into this space.
I mean, first of all, thanks, Audrey, for having me, and good morning to everybody, and good afternoon from Berlin, I may say. We are a classic project development and investment firm that focuses on green energy. We have done quite some business in Africa in the past, and we are now working on 2 green hydrogen projects on the continent that I would say are a bit similar to the Hyphen project. They're a bit smaller in size. We believe they might be a bit earlier because in our case we got a few of the components existing already. And we're focusing on Angola and Mauritania, which is 2 of the, say, 5 or 6 top countries that offer best framework and best givens for producing green energy. Namibia certainly is also part of that list.
And Stefan, do you see the potential is exports as well, and the use case as used in European markets? Is that your kind of nexus that you're playing here?
In fact, that is what excites me so much. I've been leading the German African Business Association for the past 10 years and just handed over to a successor. And we've been trying so much to mobilize private sector money for renewable energy in Africa. As long as the energy is consumed by local off-takers, there's always a financing problem, because there's hardly credit-worthy institutions there to act as a long-term off-taker that are acceptable by European or international lenders and banks. Now, for the first time in history, we can produce green energy that's being sold to international credit-worthy strong off-takers, and that will therefore enable projects that otherwise couldn't have been built. And that, I think, is number one of what's exciting. Second, here in Germany, we import 2/3 of our energy needs today. And all of this comes in the form of natural gas, oil, coal. So if we are serious about turning 100% green by 2045, there's no way other than importing green energy, substituting some of these existing imports by green energy. And the only way to do this is hydrogen. So I believe there's going to be a strong market in Europe, strong demand. And we have the potential to divert some of the petrodollar billion dollars payments to new countries that are going to supply us with green energy in the future. And some of them are going to be in Africa.
Yeah, and I think the war in Ukraine has really just emphasized that even more, and the potential for African countries to fill European gaps. Chigozie, I'd like to come to you and Integrated Africa Power. How are you working in the space?
Yeah, thank you so much also from my side, Aubrey. I think it's a very exciting discussion we are starting to have now. Yeah, as you know, just as Integrated Africa Power, we've been working on energy development in general and energy transition within the African continent. And over the last 2 to 3 years, green hydrogen also became a hot topic within the continent, given the resources that was existing. And so currently we are doing a lot of consulting services regarding sustainability of these projects, advising both private sector and government players in that sector, and also partnering with project developers as well to get projects on the ground, especially in precarious areas. So this is mainly what we do, and we are involved in a number of countries as well, Namibia, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and so on and so forth. I think that, there's a trend of green hydrogen going on now in Africa. And I think, unlike other trends, this is really picking up fast with a lot of finance going in from both private sector and public sector. The question of risk does not seem to be a big topic when it comes to green hydrogen project, although some risks can be seen. So it's kind of something exciting in general. But at the same time, the general idea is to also to tread carefully to make sure then that African countries themselves are able to benefit also from this trend, whether socioeconomic and to make sure that whether in food security and water security, in food in energy security, that they are also these needs are also being met, while at the same time the world is pursuing climate change.
Chigozie, maybe we could dive into your home country of Nigeria. Normally, when you read about the potential for green hydrogen, Nigeria is not seen as a big hub. Are you talking about other types of hydrogen production? And for our audience, green hydrogen, it refers to the way that the hydrogen was produced. Hydrogen is hydrogen, but the production process could be made from green energy, solar or wind, as Sheldon said. Or it could be produced blue or gray hydrogen coming from more traditional fossil fuel ways. So I don't know, Chigozie, are you looking the broad range of hydrogen production, and where does Nigeria fit into that?
As I said, different countries in African continent are quite different in their makeup and also in their priorities. When it comes to Nigeria, as you know, it's a big oil and gas producing country that has a history of reliance in that particular oil and gas industry. And in fact, of course, the advancement of green hydrogen has not gone very far in Nigeria compared to other African countries for obvious reasons. One of them being the strong focus on gas as a very strong energy transition element. This was contained in the report that just came out last year. And and as you know, just in the past few months, there was also the launching of the refinery that was also built by the private sector. So I think it just gives you a little bit of a different focus in that level. But at the same time, of course, discussions on green hydrogen is going on. There are several pushes by development institutions to kind of introduce that concept, and the reason why it is important for Nigeria to pursue green hydrogen. Green hydrogen public officials are also considering it, but at the same time highlighting the several other challenges that is also existing side by side, and also questioning to what extent it is for the optimum benefit of Nigerian populace.
Well, it reminds me as what Jean-Paul kind of started out with, that it's energy transition we're talking about here. And I do wanted to get a sense of the use cases that are driving the use of green hydrogen globally. We did speak already about the need for export of green hydrogen just because of the local markets being so small. But maybe we'll come back to you, Stefan, what is driving the use in Europe? I mean, obviously climate commitments, but is it aviation? What sectors, what use cases do we see right away on the horizon coming for green hydrogen?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think we are going to have 2 or 3 phases. At the moment, a lot of people talk about transforming hydrogen to ammonia, which is a base chemical product that's being used for production of fertilizer and other chemicals. Now, for the time being, while we are still building a distribution infrastructure in Europe, I guess that there will be a first phase, a ramp-up phase, where ammonia will go and be used as ammonia rather than being cracked to get back to pure hydrogen in chemical industries. So we see ammonia as a fuel in shipping. We see ammonia as an input factor for chemical plants. In a second phase, we might see that the natural gas pipeline systems are being redone to accommodate hydrogen, and that is then going to lead to industry across the countries being having access to green hydrogen as a substitute to natural gas or other fossil fuels. So for steel production, for cement production, to name two of the most emission-intensive industries, I guess green hydrogen would make a lot of sense. And at a later stage, we are going to reach households for heatings and other applications, but that might be phase 3.
Thank you. That's very useful, the phraseology, to understand the kind of progression here. And I'm wondering, both you, Sheldon, and Stefan, in the projects you're developing, are you what kind of off-takers are you finding as you put together these large project finance deals? Sheldon, maybe we can start with you.
So I must say I've got a sort of a smaller view on the offtake side. Mostly the source would be mostly Germany at the moment. There's been some interest as well from the Japanese and the Koreans, although the dominant interest is coming from Germany. Yeah, I can unfortunately not speak into too much of the details in terms of the exact use case. Those who would be interested in importing.
Mm-hmm. And Stefan, the same. Are you seeing? I mean, you're sitting in Germany, so maybe you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I would very much agree to the regional focus, and that is for two reasons. One is because we have very ambitious climate targets, as I described in my opening statements, 100% green by 2045, imports of 2/3 of our energy needs. So we are not going to replace all of this by our own generation capacity here in country. There is still going to be heavy dependency on imports, and that if it's supposed to be 100% green, it can only be in the form of hydrogen today, given the technologies we have available. Now, in addition, because of the Ukraine war, of course, we lost an important source of supply for fossil fuels, for natural gas. That needs to be replaced, and that makes it even more urgent and earlier that there's a need, earlier than 2045. And therefore, I would agree, Germany is certainly one of the key markets people are looking at. In terms of use cases, as I said in my previous statement about the different phases, at the moment, I think it's very much major chemical industry players that would look at replacing some of the fossil generated or fossil based products they're using. But we also speak to some of the major international energy traders and utilities that in the end need to replace gas that they supply to industry, to commerce, to private households step by step.
And what kind of infrastructure, export infrastructure is needed? Sheldon, I assume you're looking at going out of Walvis Bay port, the new port. Is that how you're thinking about it? And can this just be put on ships? I mean, what kind of, we had discussions, of course, when the gas finds of Mozambique and other countries about the massive needs for LPG infrastructure for export. What kind of infrastructure is needed in this kind of phased time before we have, pipelines running hydrogen? So maybe we could, Sheldon, we can hear, and then we'll hear Stefan, and then I'll come back to John Paul on some of the policy issues.
Yeah, thanks, Aubrey. Yeah, so we would be looking at exporting through Lüderitz, which is the closest port to our project, and the port of Lüderitz is quite small, and also presents quite one of some of the challenges which we're trying to the problems we're trying to solve, and through some initiative from Hyphen, but also the Port of Rotterdam and Invest International, there's been a master plan planning exercise that's been undertaken for the port of Lüderitz, and look at the different options for expanding the port. And so two options which have been considered and are still on the table would be either what's known as a multi-buoy mooring system, which is sort of infrastructure light, and it's something that could be developed quicker, giving time for the remainder of the port development to take place. Although a formal port infrastructure, with the like physical berthing structures, are also part of the options that have been considered. But essentially, that's I guess it's between those two options. And it's all existing technology. I think that's in with the scale of the project, it's important to keep some of the technology not too, it shouldn't be too new. These are all existing technologies. The tankers, ammonia tankers, are already well established, and it's that's probably the important.
Ngozi, Stefan, do you want to jump in on export infrastructure that's needed?
Sure. I guess that's one of the major coordination challenges in some of the ongoing projects. The good news, as Sheldon said, is a lot is there, because ammonia is not new to the market. There's an existing fleet of ammonia tankers. There's a lot of ports that handle ammonia. There's import terminals around the world. The difference is just that the new type of ammonia is produced from green hydrogen, whereas so far it's been produced by cracking natural gas and using the hydrogen out of fossil natural gas. Now, with this, obviously, first of all, we need export infrastructure. That means in producing countries in Africa, we would not always have ports available. In the case of our project in Angola, that's why we are so lucky. We are going to put the plant in the middle of an existing oil and gas port that's owned by our project partner, Sonangol, that's currently being expanded. So berth and jetties and everything is there already. And we would just need to add some specific ammonia handling equipment. It needs to be cooled. Ammonia can be explosive. You might remember the disaster in Lebanon.
Yes.
That was actually ammonia. So it's very important to handle this carefully. But we have a lot of experience and experts around the world, and infrastructure is there. As long as we can get close to a port that offers the requirements. For Mauritania, it's a bit different. Actually, the government there is looking to coordinate among 4 big developers so that we can expand the port in a way that all 4 projects can use the same infrastructure. World Bank is helping, and coordinating this and synchronizing timelines between the private investment and required infrastructure is certainly one of the main challenges, I believe. Now, we also have an infrastructure problem on the other side of the ship, basically, the receiving side. We know that in Europe, we got a number of gas grid operators that have plans or have even started building ammonia receiving terminals, cracking facilities, so that you can take out the hydrogen again and use it in its pure form, and convert existing gas pipelines into hydrogen, make them fit for hydrogen transport. All of this is going on in parallel, so there's huge coordination efforts required, and that might be where government or public institutions might need to come in a bit stronger than before.
I think you've teed up Jean-Paul well to speak a little bit to this, and we have a question from the audience about the state of the regulatory framework in African countries around green hydrogen. It sounds like the government of Mauritania, in Stefan's example, is coordinating and trying to understand what kind of infrastructure is needed. I don't know if Nweke and other players, Jean-Paul, are helping in this space, but would love to hear your view on the regulatory side.
Yes, I think there are a number of countries that are actually quite far advanced. We have the members of the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, which essentially is 6 countries. Mauritania is in there, Namibia, Egypt, Morocco, all part of this, and South Africa, all part of this alliance. And that has included looking at the policy environment for the development of green hydrogen. And I think some of the interesting things, which have been touched on already, are that obviously I think Stefan mentioned this, is that one of the advantages we're going to have with the green hydrogen is that you have the opportunity through the offtakes to get financing for it. But because green hydrogen also needs to build through the renewable energy capacity, it means that we've got an opportunity to also address domestic generation needs. So we can get investment for those investments in renewables, but we can also look at the needs and how those renewables can further cater towards needs in countries and how this is linked with the energy mix. And I think those countries in the Green Hydrogen Alliance, the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, have also looked at the infrastructure needs and how this fits in with their energy mix. And there is a particular good synergy for those that have been investing or have invested in the past in natural gas, using some of that existing infrastructure, particularly those that are around ports, and anticipating the conversion that would be happening in the future. And the other aspect to keep in mind is that there are some countries in the continent that don't necessarily have access to, for example, to hydro energy or to geothermal, and they are using gas as part of their transition plan, so their base generation capacity, and doing so while anticipating the shift to hydrogen is very good. And a number of these countries, and this is where ECA has also been supporting, have been looking at the infrastructure needs in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area and the needs that this will generate. For example, we've done a study that has shown that Africa will need almost 2 million extra bulk cargo trucks for shipping across the continent. And anticipating how that infrastructure within Africa, whether it's through maritime shipping or how this kind of cargo will be transferred from one place to another, is going to be critical. But I think the number of the countries, particularly those that are in that alliance, have looked at the policy framework. They have some best practices which will be tested when we implement, because obviously we're looking very much at things that have not yet been tried and tested. But I think the key will be to adjust quickly based on needs and meeting the needs of the market, both externally, but anticipating the growth of the market as well in Africa.
And how, Jean-Paul, did this alliance come to be? I mean, obviously Namibia and South Africa have long-time close relationships, but it's a very diverse group of countries. And I don't know, where was Nweke or another entity kind of an impetus for this? And you see it expanding beyond the 6 countries?
Well, Nweke is both an initiator of ideas, but mainly a supporter of ideas. So yes, we were part of the catalyzing forces, but we respond to strong political will from countries. And renewable energy is Africa's superpower. Financing is not. We can generate electricity across the continent using solar and wind, probably cheaper than any other region, but we don't have the resources to invest in that large-scale infrastructure. And all of these countries have recognized that you need to create that policy framework to attract that investment. And it needs to be done in a way which deals with needs of the countries and anticipating those needs, fitting that into the existing energy mix, but generating a new export product, which helps in the diversification of the economy, but also strengthens Africa's comparative advantage and which exploits this renewable energy superpower.
Yeah, and this, $500 billion investment need, at least in this space, is daunting because it sits on top of an infrastructure financing gap that we've talked about many, many times. And so, Chigozie, I'd love to hear from you, but generally, what is the role of DFIs, development finance institutions, both the global ones and the African DFIs, in catalyzing this new sector?
Thank you. I think that, of course, obviously, the development financial institutions has a huge role to play because, of course, if you come to projects like this in African countries, one thing that is peculiar to projects like this is risk, whether political risks or certain other risks. And of course, when you come to the pre-feasibility phases of projects, when things are not yet well defined, and this is also where usually the private sector would shy away a lot, and then giving the space that then the DFIs use that space to then kind of catalyze the market. And it's also what we are seeing now across the green energy space. We are seeing a lot of involvement of development financial institutions, but also just development technical institutions as well, not just finance, but also in terms of advisory, helping with policy frameworks, which is quite needed. And I think that the gap that is currently existing, that we have to also be careful about, when we are making progress in technical feasibility, infrastructures, I think we are missing the link on actually carrying society along. I think this is a very big gap. There is the risk of backlash. The communities need to kind of understand and be carried along on what we're talking about. The discussion on green hydrogen seems to be happening only on the high levels. The people on this and the communities where the projects will be constructed, there is a risk of backlash. And of course, then there's need then to be more effort in kind of educating the communities, also listening to them to know what is needed, and also making sure that we integrate their needs, their individual needs also in planning this project. This is what would then ensure that these projects are sustainable. I think that we are, of course, with large-scale renewable energy projects going on around in African countries, we are also seeing cases of court cases and so many other backlashes. And it will not be any different also in green hydrogen if we kind of neglect that particular field.
But I think there's been a lot of experience in addressing that. I mean, look at the large solar that Morocco has built, the large solar that Egypt has built. A lot of that experience is going to inform the larger projects. Sheldon, Stefan, in your projects, I would love to hear kind of the role the DFIs are playing and whether African DFIs are stepping in. Because we do have a question from the audience about, how do we make these projects attractive to outside investors when there's still a greater cost to producing green hydrogen than some of the other fuels? So Sheldon, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. So at the moment, we have been engaging with lenders, sort of a very preliminary stage, and there is interest. And so, I think, I mean, you touched on an important point that the cost of finance is much higher in developing countries relative to the developed world, and that is also one of the challenges which we will be trying to address. Like some of the concerns would be trying to de-risk the project and making sure that that performance standards are satisfied.
And de-risking using political risk insurance, your ESIA, all of those traditional project finance. Is that what you mean by de-risking?
Yes, exactly. It's about making sure that the standards are understood, and that that the risks are well defined and understood before lenders actually are willing to engage. So so there's been like some discussions in that area. In terms of local lenders, sort of African finance from the African continent, there's been some support for around our project for the government in taking up equity in our project. So that's where funding has been, I guess, channeled also probably through some of the European states, making funding available to the Namibian government to capacitate them to also engage and take up equity in our project, which is something which is being investigated currently. Which
Historically and currently, I mean, I'm sitting in Washington, and the Inflation Reduction Act and all the green energy subsidies and investment potential there is there to unlock and reduce the costs of green energy production. And so we see the role of governments, including the US government in its own market, really being catalytic in pushing money into reducing costs. Stefan, are you seeing the same thing in your projects in Angola and Mauritania?
To be honest, I think we're in a lucky position that even today, we don't need subsidies to make projects commercially doable. At least that is the case for ammonia market price levels in Europe. So today we can compete with green ammonia compared to what's being traded in Europe for gray or fossil-based ammonia. But, and that is the point, it's only going to work for the best locations on the continent that we have. And therefore, because that's been discussed before, therefore it's not a coincidence that 6 countries have joined the alliance, and maybe that Nigeria is not as far as others are, because the best locations are where you have great solar and wind as a portfolio, so that you can operate electrolyzers 24/7 without interruptions and without using expensive batteries. And for this, we have 6, 7, 8 countries that are top destinations, including Namibia, Mauritania, etc. Now, for these countries, there's actually not so much economic support, financial support needed, because the projects work, they're commercially doable. And in fact, I have more equity investors queuing in front of my door for some of these projects that I could satisfy, because this obviously is a very attractive and promising new sector. Now, I think things are a bit different when it comes to debt financing. That is where we need not only commercial banks, we of course need heavy guarantees from governments, political risk insurance, export credit guarantees, etc. And of course, anything that could make financing, debt financing cheaper, given interest rate developments around the world, as much as we can reduce interest rates for investment in Africa, it becomes more likely or more realistic for these projects to take off. So I think that is mainly where DFIs need to play an important role. And of course, they have a lot of experience, as you mentioned, in all sort of project finance infrastructure projects. So I'm sure there's a lot of know-how and expertise project developers like ourselves can make use of when dealing with local communities and making sure projects are done in a sustainable, long-lasting way.
And Stefan, I'd like to stay with you for a second, because we have a couple questions from the audience where their base assumption is that the cost of production of green hydrogen in Africa is probably very high. And your point about it being cost competitive today with ammonia is quite compelling. And so do you see that those costs overall falling quickly as we did with solar? And if so, does it open the universe a little further to new countries and larger projects and things of this sort?
I mean, the main driver of ammonia cost, green ammonia production cost, is the electricity price at which we can generate green electricity in Africa. All the rest is, I wouldn't say minor, but the electricity price is the main driver. And a lot of experts say that we can meet European price for gray ammonia if we can get the electricity at, say, 2.5 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour in Africa. And that is doable for a number of countries, not for all of them, and of course depends on the financing structure and financing cost. But there's countries that got enough solar and wind in a good combination. Of course, you need access to water, you need access to export infrastructure, but there's 5 or 6 countries that meet these criteria. And for these, we believe we can be competitive today. Certainly, we can be competitive under an environment that we've seen half a year ago in European markets when gas prices went up significantly. So we've been very profitable theoretically during that period, and who knows what comes this winter. So there is a significant off-takers and traders who believe that a business case can be made today.
Nweke-Eze, did you want to come in on this as well?
Yeah, I think Stephen is right. Of course, as time goes on, there would of course be a competitive price because of existence of resources that are cheap, and also the price of electricity matters a lot. And I think that beyond that, it also gives us a lot of opportunity. I mean, I had also been to Angola to also take a little bit a look at the project that Stephen is also involved in. I think you see a special opportunity there where an unused hydropower project has not been developed. And then this hydropower project will be developed for this production of green hydrogen. Of course, you see the cost of electricity coming down, making sure that then the final produce is low. So I think such kind of resources, and then prices will play a huge role. And I think that there has to be, I mean, we've already mentioned about countries coming together. I mean, with the alliance, I think one of the reasons why these countries are also together is also to learn from each other, to also learn from the mistakes. I mean, in certain areas, Namibia has also gone ahead in terms of negotiation with the government and what is needed, and then needs to kind of carry other countries along in terms of understanding what kind of regulatory frameworks do you need to focus on, and so on and so forth. How do you structure financing in a way that makes sense? So there's a lot of cross-learning and also cooperation that needs to happen. I mean, of course, throughout the whole southern corridor of Namibia, South Africa, Angola, there has to also be some kind of connection when it comes to infrastructure. And so, of course, this would also contribute to lowering the cost of final produce when you coordinate infrastructures right now, not later. And so all these points, I think, are points that would reduce the cost. As you know, there has been a lot of efforts to also do further research in electrolysis, and I feel that electrolyzers, but also the cost of electrolyzers will also come down in the next 5 to 6 years, to the extent that you can actually begin to produce electricity at a cheaper price with hydrogen.
Yeah, and I think that your point and Stefan's point is quite salient. You know, often people talk about averages in Africa, but averages don't do well in a continent of 54 countries with great diversity. I mean, the average price an individual a Nigerian pays for power can range whatever 23 cents to 47 cents kilowatt hour, and it could be down to 5 cents in Ethiopia because of hydro, right? And that difference, or about 8 to 12 cents in Kenya, where you got geothermal, and so you just have a huge variation in the costs involved. But you know, the work of our inclusive climate finance working group, in part, is to inform policymakers, particularly in developed countries and the development project partners of African countries. And so, I guess, John Paul, I'd love to hear from you and others. What can, say, the US DFC or other entities here in Washington or in European capitals do to be more supportive to speed up the change that we're seeing in African markets around green hydrogen, and ensure that countries don't miss out on all this climate finance that will go somewhere, and hopefully it will go to African countries?
Well, I think I will break it down to maybe three areas. The first is regulatory environment. And it's not like there's nothing done. We need support to do that. I mean, we can build on what those countries that have already started this process and try to replicate it, because as much as possible, we need to have also linkages between what individual countries are doing, and we can use the African Continental Free Trade Area as one of the mechanisms to help accelerate that. But we need support to build that, and I think it makes sense that organizations that are in the development space support that. Secondly, in terms of the financing architecture, I think that there is still this risk perception around Africa, and de-risking of projects, whether it be through insurance mechanisms, blended finance mechanisms such as credit enhancements, are all necessary at the start to get proof of concept. And once you have projects up and running, then the proof is in the pudding. You will see that finance will probably flow very naturally. But I was very encouraged by Stefan's comments that based on the environment in Africa, we may even not require that. But I know from past experience that when there's something new happening in Africa, the risk tends to be priced in, and there has to be, and the ideal, particularly when you're starting something which is new and uncertain, having that support, I think, will help it to go in the right direction. And then the other aspect is the development of local capacity and the linkage with the broader, what I would call the value chain around hydrogen, and ensuring that that is fully benefiting the countries where this will be deployed. And I think development partners such as the DFC, but others that are so DFC, I think, particularly around the de-risking and institutions like them. But I think it has to be a whole an effort which brings in expertise in those three areas, essentially, to ensure that we maximize the opportunity for Africa.
Yeah, and so as we wrap up this conversation, though I think we could take it much longer and much deeper, I'd like to end with a question both for Stefan, Sheldon, and Nweke-Eze as well, but recommendations for investors or entrepreneurs who want to get into this space and be early movers. We had a question from the audience about the overall hydrogen value chain and how can entrepreneurs be involved in various parts of it. African entrepreneurs and foreign investors, how can African companies be involved? So I'd love your closing thoughts on the opportunities for entrepreneurs and investors. So maybe Nweke-Eze, we start with you, and then we'll finish down the line.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, of course, as I said, there are some socioeconomic indices that needs to be improved within African countries. One of them is job creation. I think this is very pertinent in all the countries that green hydrogen is currently being produced. There has to be serious efforts to make sure that there is an opening for entrepreneurs to come in within various stages of the value chain, and that jobs are created. I mean, of course, you know, and this is the way in which then you create that buy-in of the country, of the communities in these projects. So one thing that we need to do that is currently also lacking is that there is currently no overall appreciation of the entrepreneurship opportunities within the green hydrogen value chain. So far, we've been like focusing a lot on the production and getting prices low as possible, but entrepreneurs, especially local entrepreneurs, have not been able to appreciate exactly in which ways they can come in. And I think that we need to do a little bit more work on that. Because of course, if this creates jobs, then it will also make green hydrogen to progress further. Of course, green hydrogen is supposed to create spillover effects, especially, I mean, if you have a green hydrogen project, of course, it gives you electricity. I mean, it's also envisaged that it kind of attracts certain kind of investments, not just only in green hydrogen sector, but also in other related sectors, you see, and also taking advantage of that particular, you can call it special economic zone. So these are, I think when we're talking of green hydrogen, and its benefits, we should also bear in mind some of the spillover effects that it can have and socioeconomic development, and we should also be aware of them.
Sure. You listen, every day we talk about at the Africa Center that 1 million Africans turn 18 every month, right? And the continent as a whole maybe produces about 1 million formal jobs a year. So we have a huge deficit when it comes to employment and opportunity diffusion. But Sheldon, thoughts and maybe how local Namibian companies are involved and the overall value chain?
Yes, so I think we still at a very early stage at this point in the project, and obviously we as the project development team are giving this a lot of thought, because you don't know what you don't know, and you know, it's especially given a project of our scale. I think what's really essential is good communication, transparency, you know, a collaborative approach. There are so many stakeholders involved in these projects, and having clear communication lines and making sure that expectations are navigated carefully, and you know, through open dialogue and making sure that I think Nweke-Eze mentioned, you know, trying to make sure that people are aware, because it's something new they might not really understand, and making sure that you bring the communities that you are going to be impacting along with you in the journey. I think that's going to be a challenge. And
you as a local entrepreneur, how did you get involved? What if someone wants to build a hyphen project in their own country? How did you kind of start out in this process?
Like a big part of I guess hyphen success was the government was quite ambitious and basically paved the way. They created the policy environment. They were I guess, for lack of a word, hungry enough to really go for the to take the opportunity with both hands. And they've you know, they ran a competitive process, and you know, the rest is history. Like we obviously won, but it's yeah, it's I think I'm not really sure if I'm phrasing I understand the way you're phrasing it, entrepreneurs like sort of like in the value chain, small scale, or we're talking like hyphen scale?
Anyone who wants to get involved in the sector.
Yeah, like I think if you're thinking value chain, it probably makes sense to anticipate what's coming and try and understand, what are some of the infrastructure needs, and maybe positioning oneself to deliver on steel, construct concrete. These are some of the really big inputs that are coming, and if there are artisans, I mean, even training centers, there'd be a lot of labor upfront during the construction phase, really intense. So there'd be a lot of opportunities, I guess, at least in the short term, construction-wise.
Stefan, over to you. How are you looking at the overall value chain in your projects, and where you see gaps and opportunities?
I guess the good news is that we are for about 1,000 projects that are being discussed in hydrogen worldwide at the moment, 1,000. Most of them are still in a development phase, and that is capital light, as opposed to investing billions in ports and wind and solar parks. Now, we do have a lot of successful local renewable energy developers, and hydrogen projects are nothing else than two pieces. One is wind and solar parks. That's business that a lot of Africans have been doing in the past, and I think they can continue and make use of that experience in capital light project development to a certain stage, when they might then want to call international investors in to take over or to bring additional capital for next phases. And the second piece is the chemicals plant, which of course is heavier investment, but also the early stage development is not such a problem for local highly skilled people. And also we've seen fertilizer plants on the continent, which is nothing different basically. So I think we can see local developers, but we can also see service providers. At the moment, there's a lot of wind and solar measurements that need to be done, legal negotiations. You need local lawyers, you need service providers, you need people to do ESRAs and all of these things. So I'm sure there's a lot of room for local entrepreneurs. Maybe a bit more difficult when it comes to the capital intensive implementation period, when I guess international financial investors will need to come in and take the lead.
Well, thank you for that kind of overview. Good frameworks from which to look at this emerging sector. And we at the working group will continue to follow it. We are looking at, of course, things that African governments and countries have been good at or have a lot of with natural gas, but to new technologies like green hydrogen as well. So with that, I want to thank my esteemed panelists. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And thank you to the audience for joining us in this important conversation. That's just a beginning. And continue to look out for our forthcoming events at the Africa Center. We have many on the horizon. And again, it's really been my pleasure today. So everyone have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you soon at the Africa Center.